Hello there! Welcome to Skanky Productions. I'm Crown Grace Kokon. Let's get into the video. Today's video we're going to be asking the question of what if the Mongols never conquered Russia? So if you like what you've seen already, don't forget obviously hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, hit the bell button so you stay notified, and also don't forget to check out the many other videos that we have in this playlist. I promise that you will not be disappointed. And also we have to give a massive shout out to SGV Media, so they're the ones who gave the suggestion for this video. And also we should give a shout out to Kraut, so they did a video on the origins of Russian authoritarianism. But that video there really inspired me as well. But like we said, we have to give a massive shout out to SGV Media, and also we have to give a shout out to all the other people who left a comment in the last video. So this is something new which we're doing for the channel, so we're giving shout outs to people who leave a comment in the comment section. So please don't forget to leave a comment in here and you will get a shout out in the next video. So, as we always do with our videos, first of all we give you the history, then we give you the alternative history, but we should also say the kind of caveat which we always say, which is this would never have happened. And the reason why this would never have happened is a little bit more complex than we normally would have, and the reason for that is because while there were some decisive battles which took place during this time, the Mongols, they were kind of an unstoppable force, and the only reason why they withdrew from where they were in Europe was kind of because there ended up being a Khan who ended up dying. And so as a result of that, they kind of was like, okay, we need to go back to Mongolia to elect the new Khan. So it kind of was more because they decided to, as opposed to them necessarily being stopped. And actually, as you can see on the map here, they conquered most of Eurasia. So realistically, yeah, there wasn't much that really kind of stopped them in this, right? But it's still fun to theorize because the impact that they had on Russia all the way to the present day has been very, very long lasting, and so that's why we're doing this video. So without further ado, we're going to dive straight in now, so buckle up and let's go for the ride. So our story starts with the Kievan Rus, which was founded in 882 AD and lasted up until 1240 AD. And this was basically a loose confederation of various different city-states, and among which there was the Novgorod Republic, which was founded in 1136 AD, and you had Vladimir Sostal, which was founded in 1157 AD as a monarchy, otherwise known as the Grand Duchy of Vladimir. So by the 1240s, there was lots of contention, right? And the reason for this is because the Kievan Rus, which had once been this very strong confederation, had by this time become a series of fragmented and factional competing states. At which point, the Mongols come in. And this is where they basically laid waste to much of the territory here. They burned down many of the towns and cities, and they actually depopulated what is estimated as a European Russia from a population of about 7.5 million down to 7 million. So 500,000 people wiped out by this Mongol invasion. And what was actually put in its place was a system of vassalage. So basically what this was that the Mongols, they had the local leaders of these different states, and they forced them to basically be the tax collectors for the Mongol yoke. So this is the Golden Horde, which ended up being founded in 1260, and this lasted all the way up till 1458. So you're talking about a period of almost 200 years where there's this Mongol yoke on the Russian people. However, it should be noted that one state managed to survive this onslaught, and this was the state of the Novgorod Republic. So, how did this state stand out from the rest of the different states which were in Russia? Well, it stands out because it, from its very early days, was very much a democratic society. So it was actually a much more akin to many of the states which you had in Northern Europe and in Western Europe at the time. And these states obviously eventually became what we think of as the West, where you end up having certain norms. So, there's democratic accountability. The leader is not an absolute leader. And also you have a thriving, pre-capitalist economy, right? Where the state doesn't have that much control over people's finances and where trade is allowed to kind of flourish. So as a result of this, Novgorod not only survived, but actually thrived during this time. And this is because it was interconnected with the rest of Europe through what was known as the Hanzatic League. So the Hanzatic League was basically predominantly over the different northern German states along the North Sea and the Baltic Sea, and it stretched all the way from Holland and England on its far western side, all the way up to the Novgorod Republic, which was on its far eastern side. And so as a result of this, it ended up being very much influenced by the rest of Europe, while the rest of Russia, during the Mongol yoke, ended up being cut off from this Western influence. And so this is why Novgorod ended up having these things called vetches. So these were basically public assemblies in which the people there actually had the power to elect and to get rid of the prince of that state. And also it should be noted that the people there actually, in many cases, were property owners. So half the population of Novgorod were actually landowners, and there was a relative equal distribution of wealth in place. And also what was quite unusual for the time, especially in Russia, was that you had a very high level of literacy. So this meant that the people there actually had, they were informed citizens, in a way that many of the other people in these other states were not used to being. And on the other hand, you end up having the Grand Duchy of Vladimir, and out of the Grand Duchy of Vladimir, this is where you end up having the arising of a new state, and this was the Grand Duchy of Moscow. So Moscow ended up becoming the central place for tax collection within the Golden Horde, and this is why Moscow ended up becoming very much more and more powerful. And the leaders over time ended up overthrowing the Mongol yoke, and then went about subjugating the other people of Russia, and this eventually ended up becoming the Tsardom of Russia, which is the precursor of modern Russia today. So this state here, the Grand Duchy of Moscow, was an absolute monarchy. So it was as far away from what you can see in the Novgorod Republic as you can possibly get. And this state here, which was incredibly militaristic, incredibly expansionist, incredibly authoritarian and autocratic, this was the state which ended up being the precursor for modern Russia. So with this scenario here, we're going to imagine, for whatever reason, the Mongols simply never invade Russia. How would Russia today be different? That's what we're going to explore now. So we have to say that the Grand Duchy of Moscow, the reason why it rose to such prominence is because its first leader was the son of Alexander Nevsky. So Alexander Nevsky, he is almost seen as a kind of founding father of Russia, and actually he's a canonized saint within the Orthodox Church. And also as well, it should be noted that the Soviets made a very famous film of him, and this was done by Sergei Eisenstein. We're going to cover him in our second channel. So our second channel looks at film. At some point, we're going to be looking at Eisenstein. So definitely subscribe if you haven't seen it already, and definitely stay tuned for that, which will come in the future. So Alexander Nevsky ended up actually being appointed as the Prince of Novgorod, and he served there from 1236 to 1240 AD. Then also from 1241 to 1256 AD, and then finally in 1258 to 1259 AD. So in 1238, this is where the former Prince of Vladimir ended up being killed by the invading Mongols, and this is where the new prince ended up assigning Alexander to take over when he died. And so he ended up becoming the Grand Prince of Kiev in 1246, and then later became the Grand Prince of Vladimir in 1252, which marked him as the supreme ruler of all Russia. Well, at least in name only. So from this point on, there ended up just being lots of dynastic squabbling, which is a bit too long to get into, we'll just be here all day. But the main thing to note is that the son of Alexander Nevsky, he ended up taking over, and this set Russia on the path of authoritarianism and autocracy, which lasts pretty much to the present day. So if the Mongols had never conquered Russia, as we covered in our video which looked at what if the Mongols had conquered Japan, so definitely go and check that video out. That video there, we pointed out that every society which the Mongols conquered ended up, when they eventually lifted off the Mongol yoke, end up becoming very autocratic, very authoritarian, and very reactionary. And so you can see this with what ended up emerging as Russia. So if the Mongols had never invaded, and of course from their invasion where they destroyed so much and killed so many people, what ended up happening then is an ultra-conservative backlash. And if this hadn't happened, then Russia today would be very, very similar to many of the other places in Europe. So if you look at England during this time, France during this time, the Holy Roman Empire, the post-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and many of the Nordic countries, you can see already the very early days of this kind of free society which we today enjoy in the West. So Russia, in many ways, would be quote-unquote westernized if, instead of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, if it had been the Novgorod Republic which had taken over, then that's what we would kind of see. And actually, the Novgorod Republic wasn't atypical in the sense of most of the other states before the Mongol invasion were very similar to it. So it's only with the Mongol invasion that we see Russia become authoritarian in this way. And actually, it should be noted that in the 1458, when the Grand Duchy of Moscow end up expanding, and when they eventually end up coming into Novgorod, how they treated it really gives you an idea of how much disdain the rulers for that had for any sort of semblance of a democratic state. Because when they took over, they didn't just conquer it. Instead, what they did is they purposely destroyed the Vetches. They destroyed the Vetcher Bell, which was a symbol of the democracy of the Novgorod Republic. They burnt down the library, so obviously there would be no more record keeping, there'd be no more culture which would last. And also, they parceled out the land between the king and his lords, so that 81.7% of the land of Novgorod end up being owned by them. So it was the complete destruction of that entire culture, which had lasted up until that point. And actually what's sad is that in a way, the Mongol invasions end up being finally completed, as the one state which had managed to hold out throughout all this time end up being crushed by the inheritors of the Mongol legacy. And so, unfortunately, that ended a chapter in what could have been for Russia, and to this present day, we are still seeing the long-term effects of that. So, that video was obviously quite depressing, but if you liked it, don't forget obviously hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, hit the bell button so you stay notified, and also don't forget to stay tuned for our next video, which is going to be on what if Russia became Catholic. So a few years ago, we did our video on what if Russia became Muslim, so definitely go and check that video out, it's very popular, but very much tied in with the kind of history of that. Basically, Russia also, in theory, could have become Catholic during that time. So that's what the next video is going to be exploring. But of course, if you want a shout out in that video, don't forget to obviously leave a comment in the end of this one. And that being said, have a great day and bye.